Let's now start with our top story. The Taliban and Afghan government have held a virtual meeting on the prisoner release issue under the Doha Agreement. This is the first interaction between the two sides since the signing of the peace agreement on February 29th.
U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad said prisoner release by both sides will be an important step in the peace process. He said all sides conveyed their commitment to a reduction in violence, intra-Afghan talks, and a permanent ceasefire. Khalilzad said all involving parties have also agreed to a follow-on technical meeting in the next 2 days. Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said discussion was held in presence of Qatari and American representatives. He said only prisoners released were discussed, while other issues will be discussed during the intra-Afghan negotiations. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has arrived in Afghanistan to meet with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and his rival Abdullah Abdullah.
Well, Iran's foreign ministry says hasty measures taken by the U.S. administration for the peace process are the main reason of instability in Afghanistan. The foreign ministry said a hurried deal with the Taliban and Washington's ignorance of domestic issues led to the political crisis in the war-torn country. In a statement, the ministry said Iran is alarmed by the unpredictable consequences of disputes over the Afghan presidential poll results. It said the U.S. signed a peace deal with the Taliban to boost the election campaign of President Donald Trump. It said by prioritizing its self-interest, Washington has caused an escalation of political tensions in Afghanistan. The ministry said the Islamic Republic is closely monitoring political and security developments in the neighboring country. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says the U.S. should lift sanctions if it wants to help Tehran contain the coronavirus outbreak. In a televised speech, Rouhani said Tehran has no intention of accepting Washington's offer of humanitarian assistance. Rouhani said Washington is responsible for a number of difficulties and issues Iranian society is currently facing. Earlier, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said U.S. sanctions on Iran are impeding the global fight against the coronavirus pandemic. In a tweet, Zarif said despite global pressure, Washington is not lifting curbs on Tehran. The foreign minister said the only remedy in this situation is to defy Washington's mass punishment, as it is the only moral imperative. Pakistan, China, and Russia have already asked the U.S. to lift Iran's sanctions to combat the rising threat of COVID-19. Well, to stem the spread of the new coronavirus, countries around the world are increasingly adopting sweeping measures. Saudi Arabia has imposed a nationwide curfew after a jump of almost 25% in coronavirus cases. This report has more.
The world is struggling to beat the new coronavirus. Airports around the globe have been shut down, travel restrictions have been imposed, and borders have been completely sealed off. The United Arab Emirates has suspended all passenger and transit flights to and from the country. Singapore Airlines says it is grounding 96% of its fleet. New Zealand has imposed a self-isolation with all non-essential services, schools, and offices to be shut over the next 48 hours.
Cabinet met today and agreed that effective immediately, we will move to alert level 3 nationwide. After 48 hours, the time required to ensure essential services are in place, we will move to level 4. These decisions will place the most significant restrictions on New Zealanders' movements in modern history.
Jordan's administration has authorized physicians to use hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID-19 in an advanced stage of the disease. The war-torn country of Syria has reported its first case of the new coronavirus. Pakistan's total infection has crossed 800 with nearly 30 new cases in the past 24 hours. The UK has called the army to help deliver supplies of protective equipment or to health workers. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says people need to heed the government's advice on social distancing in order to defeat the pandemic.
Always remember that each and every one of us, you are doing your bit in following this advice. You're doing your bit to slow the spread of the disease, and the more we collectively slow the spread, the more time we give the NHS to prepare, the more lives we will save, the faster we will get through this. And always remember, we will get through this, and we will beat it, and we will beat it together.
Meanwhile, the situation in China continues to improve as no new domestic case of COVID-19 has been reported during the last 24 hours.
Well, in New Zealand, the central bank has decided to inject about $17 billion into the financial system in a bid to stop a pandemic-induced financial rout. The Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee says under the program, the bank will buy back state bonds to ease liquidity pressure. In the Philippines, the central bank has approved about $6 billion program to buy back government securities. Additional liquidity will allow governments to fund projects to counter the impact of the virus. Meanwhile, the World Bank said it is preparing to launch 40 COVID-19 aid projects worth over $1.5 billion. The bank's president, David Malpass, said funding can come out of a $14 billion fast-track facility, which was approved to help countries fighting coronavirus. Qatar has also announced it will provide $150 million in support for Gaza in its fight against the pandemic. Well, New York's mayor says the city is about 10 days away from seeing widespread medical shortages, and people will die due to it. New York State has become the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in the U.S. and accounts for almost half of the country's cases. In an interview, Mayor Bill de Blasio said the outbreak will get worse, with damage accelerated by shortages of key medical supplies. New York State has reported an increase of over 4,600 new cases of coronavirus over the past 24 hours. The new statistics show that the state alone has 5% of the global COVID-19 cases. Meanwhile, 3 members of the U.S. Congress have tested positive for the coronavirus, and at least 22 others went into self-quarantine. In Colombia, 23 people have died in a prison riot in the capital, Bogota. The country's justice ministry says 83 others were wounded. Officials said detainees were protesting unsanitary conditions amid the global outbreak of coronavirus. The justice minister said 7 prison guards were also wounded and 2 are in critical condition. The Andean country will enter a nationwide lockdown from Tuesday night. So far, 231 people have been infected with the disease in the country and 2 have died. In Brazil, 11 people have died and 17 others were injured after a bus collided into a truck in the southeastern state of Minas Gerais. Federal Highway Police said the accident took place around dawn along a highway near the town of Pirapora. Officials said the bus driver entered the opposite lane, colliding head-on with a truck. The bus was heading from northeast Bahia state to the city of Paracatu in Minas Gerais. Officials said all of the victims were men traveling aboard the bus. On to India now, where protests and sit-ins against the controversial Citizenship Act have adapted themselves amid the coronavirus pandemic. New Delhi has been facing countrywide demonstrations against the law, killing 83 people since December 11th. The all-women sit-in at Delhi's Shaheen Bagh is sticking to its 5-protester limit, recording their protest against the law. Organizers said they would continue the protest, keeping all precautionary measures. Earlier yesterday, the protest was attacked once again after an unidentified individual threw a petrol bomb near the protest site. Meanwhile, protesters across India have vowed to continue registering their protests through social media. Organizers have asked protesters to record their videos against the law and share them on different online platforms. Pakistan is celebrating its National Day with simplicity amid the coronavirus outbreak and with a pledge to fight the pandemic. In his speech, Prime Minister Imran Khan called for national unity on the day to tackle the outbreak. The government has cancelled all kinds of public gatherings, including a military parade, as precautionary measures amid COVID-19. Pakistan Day commemorates the Lahore Resolution presented on March 23, 1940, for a separate country for Muslims in the subcontinent. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Islamabad is ready to host the SARC conference of the region's health ministers. He said this in a telephone call with his Nepalese counterpart Pradeep Kumar Gyawali. Qureshi suggested that a video conference could be organized to formulate a strategy regarding the current global health emergency. The two ministers also discussed ways to enhance mutual cooperation to combat the coronavirus pandemic. Qureshi said Pakistan has a stance that sanctions on Iran should be lifted so that relief can be provided at this time of crisis. The two officials reiterated mutual commitment to strengthen friendship as both countries are observing the 60th anniversary of their diplomatic ties. Foreign Minister Qureshi also spoke to his Sri Lankan counterpart on tackling the coronavirus pandemic. Israeli forces have killed a Palestinian in the occupied West Bank. Palestine's health ministry says the youth was martyred in the Nailin region west of Ramallah. A health official said another Palestinian was wounded and taken to the Palestine Medical Complex in Ramallah. The Israeli army said its troops fired towards suspects, hurling rocks at their vehicles driving on a highway. There were no reports of injuries to the motorists. I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Let's begin this segment of the bulletin in Guinea, where violence has erupted in different parts of the country, including the capital Conakry, after the opposition called to boycott elections. Guinea went to polls on Sunday to elect members of parliament and to vote on a constitutional referendum. Local media said clashes broke out at polling, causing delays to the start of the voting process. The opposition boycotted the referendum because they believe President Alpha Condé will use it to seek a third mandate. The president's mandate expires in December. The twin referendum and legislative election poll was maintained despite the outbreak of coronavirus, which is gaining pace in sub-Saharan Africa. The Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba has donated protective and medical equipment to Ethiopia. The first batch of the apparatus has reached the capital, Addis Ababa, as the coronavirus cases soared above 1,100 across Africa. In a statement, the company's co-founder, Jack Ma's foundation, said that the flight carried over 5 million face masks and kits for over 1 million detection tests. The local disease control center said that only patients with symptoms will be tested. In a tweet, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said that the distribution of supplies will begin from today. The virus has spread more slowly in Africa than in Asia and Europe, but has a foothold in 41 African nations. It has claimed 37 lives across the continent of 1.3 billion people so far. On to the UK now, where scientists are set to track spread of new coronavirus and watch for emerging mutations by using gene sequencing. The government says it is setting up a £20 million project to track the spreads. The government's chief scientific advisor said genomic sequencing will help scientists understand COVID-19 and its spread. He said it can also help guide treatments in the future and see the impact of interventions. Researchers will collect data from samples from infected patients in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. In epidemics, genome sequencing can help scientists monitor small changes in the virus at a large scale to understand whether different strains are emerging. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic may have put a damper on Mother's Day in Lebanon this year, but 3 students have come up with a new service to celebrate the occasion without flouting social distancing restrictions. This report has the details.
In a quiet Lebanese town under lockdown over the novel coronavirus, a drone buzzed towards a balcony to deliver a red rose to a mother grinning in surprise. Down in the street in the coastal town of Jobinai, 18-year-old Christopher Ibrahim texts a teenager who has ordered a flower drop-off for his mother. He slips a single rose in a ring hanging under the aircraft, and it lifts off into the air to carry the flower to its intended recipient.
The idea is I'm a drone operator. I film weddings and events with a drone. I'm studying engineering at the Lebanese University in Romania. So I come up with the idea of flying rose, where on Mother's Day we will deliver a rose to mothers via drone.
For a week, most of Lebanese have been ordered to remain at home to stem the spread of COVID-19. The airport has closed and all non-essential businesses have been told to shutter.
Another part of the project is about helping our country. Everything that we make from the project will be contributed to the Red Cross because they are the ones who need support the most during this period.
Ibrahim said each rose delivery costs between 10,000 to 20,000 Lebanese pounds. He added that the earning of this project will go to the Red Cross.
Well, the World Bank has approved a $170 million loan to improve Bangladesh's sanitation services that will benefit 1.5 million residents. The World Bank says the Dhaka Sanitation Improvement Project will help improve the city's liability with safely managed sanitation services. The bank's country director for Bangladesh said 3.5 million people in Dhaka live in poor sanitation. She said the project will help ensure safe sanitation, which is essential for reducing public health risks as well as extreme poverty. In Dhaka, untreated domestic sewage and industrial effluent are illegally discharged into rivers and canals, causing pollution and flooding. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says the world's water resources are under an unprecedented threat. In his message to the World Water Day, Guterres said up to 4.4 billion people in the world will live with limited access to water. The UN chief said currently some 2.2 billion people lack safe drinking water and 4.2 billion people live without access to adequate sanitation. Talking about the situation, Guterres said the world needs to increase investments in healthy watersheds with dramatic improvements in the efficiency of water use. The UN chief asked all people to play a role to help alleviate the shortage of water. Well, oil prices have dropped after a $3 trillion Senate proposal to help coronavirus-hit American economy was defeated. Brent crude futures fell 4% to below $26 a barrel, while WTI crude futures dropped nearly 1% to about $22.5 a barrel. Oil prices have fallen for 4 straight weeks and have lost about 60% since the beginning of the year. The latest drop came after the proposal garnered zero support from Democrats and failed to pass key Senate procedural vote. The stalemate came hours after Democratic leaders warned the rescue package bails out big companies and offers less to help workers. European markets have slumped as the coronavirus outbreak continues to take its toll on the international community and financial markets. Investors have resorted to panic selling after trillion-dollar fiscal stimulus bill failed a key procedural Senate vote. Frankfurt's DAX and FTSE 100 have plunged about 4.5%. The CAC 40 in Paris is trading over 4% lower. In Asia, Seoul's Kospi plunged over 5%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng closed about 5% lower. The Shanghai Composite lost ground, while Nikkei 225 bucked up the trend. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. Well, for the latest updates on these and other stories, you can always follow us on our social media at Indus.news. Thanks for watching this.